Kick it off or wait a few more minutes.
I think we can probably kick it off. We have quite a few folks and a lot of topics.
Awesome. So I shared the agenda in the chat. I see Ilya on the call, which is awesome because the first topic is Ilya's. Um, this first topic is about test failures caused by health warnings, and there's this PR attached or associated with the topic. Ilya, I'll let you take that away.
I think Chris is here, and he actually is the one.
Yeah, I'll give a brief summary of where we're at with it. So in the task Ceph ADM and QA, I discovered that the ignore list or badness check wasn't doing two things correctly. It wasn't checking for standard error, and then also it was pointing at the wrong log location for checking for health warnings. There's a tracker there I just posted in chat that shows the failure condition. I did create a draft PR to take into account and check standard error and the correct log location. And then from there, I wanted to test it against librd API. So like a lot of the other components in the product, the ignore list had standard entries that we kind of just copy all over the place for each of our tests. At least that's what we do for RBD API, librd API. So I used that standard list of about 5 entries that we had to run another test in Pathology with the draft PR that I mentioned that fixes the log location and standard error. And it ended up running, and it checked and saw that those 5 entries were ignored, but then there were an additional slew of entries that were non-related to the librd API test itself. I've highlighted there's about 15 entries that are additional. It seems not present in other tasks, so like the Manila Ceph task, badness check, those 5 entries that I included before that aren't highlighted are actually all that's needed. So from there, this behavior has been present in Ceph ADM since inception. I believe it was copied. It was like Ceph 2 task before, and it's been there for about 3 years. So with that, there's some challenges. We merge that draft PR in. There will be additional checks that other components will have to have, or we could go a different avenue as well, and that's up for discussion at this point of how we'd like to proceed. From the Rados team, Laura did a similar analysis on on the Rados, like I did with the librd API. Did you want to share that now, Laura? And then we can have a discussion afterwards.
Sure. So the biggest concern on the Rados side of things was just with merging this PR, we don't want to end up breaking the Rados suite with warnings. So I ran excuse me, I ran this PR through the Rados suite, and I noticed that it mostly affected tests that had the Ceph ADM task in it, which naturally, since that's what your PR is making changes to. So the Rados suite duplicates a lot of those tests from the orchestrator suite. So a lot of tests that were specific to Rados weren't affected, but a lot of tests that are, like Rados, Ceph ADM, those are the ones that fail due to your PR catching cluster badness, like an OSD down warning or things like that. So I'd say it was a good amount of tests that were failed, but there was a clear pattern of which tests were failing, and it was clear to me that they were all Ceph ADM related and could be likely fixed with whitelisting. So just from the Rados side of things, that's the biggest thing for us, that we wouldn't want the PR to break things upon merging. But that was my main analysis, that there was a clear pattern of Ceph ADM tests that this was affecting. And I imagine you'd see something similar running it through the org suite as well.
Yeah, the entire orchestrator suite is obviously broken because it's all based on Ceph ADM as opposed to Rados, which I think is just a big part of Rados suite is based on Ceph ADM, but not all of it.
Exactly.
For RBD, it's actually the reverse. There's only a couple of jobs that are using Ceph ADM, and everything else is still using the old kind of pathology way of deploying Ceph, and therefore the set of whitelists in the RBD suite is actually complete. Nothing is going to break when this PR gets merged. But the reason I wanted to bring this into wider forum is that we basically have an instance of a fairly major suite where some parts of it are also duplicated in other suites, like you said, and then some of the other suites were actually migrated to Ceph ADM, which means that they're no longer using the old Ceph task, but the new Ceph ADM task for deploying Ceph. And the situation is basically that for, I think, almost 3 years, the check that checks for cluster badness, as you put it, that checks for these warnings, has been completely absent from Ceph ADM task. And I think there is now a sentiment that maybe like we don't need to grab for these warnings. Maybe we don't need to fail tests based on these warnings, like as a project as a whole. And so basically there is like we are at a kind of decision point here. Either we go ahead and add a ton of whitelists to the Ceph ADM suite, basically duplicating all of the Rados whitelisting, because Ceph ADM doesn't do anything special with regards to higher level functionality. It's basically just a repeat of the Rados suite with some Ceph ADM specific stuff in it. So either we do that and just overhaul the Ceph ADM suite with whitelists, or I guess allow lists as they're called now, or we just drop them all together from all suites and stop caring about them. That's the kind of the project-wide decision that needs to be made, and that's what I want to get out of this meeting. Do we think that these like catching these warnings is useful? Or is that kind of a thing of the past now? Personally, for RBD, like I said, nothing is going to break when this PR is merged, so we're fine either way. And I would actually prefer that these warnings stay and that we continue failing tests if something pops up. But I do agree that it's, it may seem tedious, and it's basically the same set of, or almost the same set of allow lists that gets copied from job to job, sometimes rather meaninglessly. So I could see when Chris was looking into it, I kind of lent a hand, and I could see that in a bunch of jobs, in particular in the upgrade suite, where it's not really curated. It's basically just a recursive copy every time a release is made, with some fix-ups to make it work. There's a bunch of like allow lists that are clearly excessive and shouldn't be there, and then also a bunch that are missing. So we haven't done a good job of maintaining these, and the FADM related breakage obviously helped because the breakage just wasn't highlighted. So what do folks think? Are they still useful, or should we just get rid of them?
I don't know if it would help to explain kind of or identify what types of warnings we're seeing. But this is part of what I did in my analysis here. I can link this in our main tracker for this meeting as well. But I looked through the tests that failed and why they failed, and kind of categorized what the badness warning was. And the majority was like for an OSD down health warning. There was like a lot of Ceph ADM stray daemon warnings, one about a monitor being down or quorum or reduced data availability. So of course we'd have to see exactly, or maybe it'd make more sense to look at what the test is actually testing for, but most of the warnings fell into those categories, and I don't know if we can consider those as something to whitelist, like, okay, an OSD went down, but as long as it came back up, we don't care, so we can whitelist that or allow it.
No, I think for the OSD down, like if the test doesn't actively mark OSDs down, that shouldn't happen, and that's actually part of the reason that I think that these things are useful, because stuff like, for example, slow ops, I think it would be hard for us to find a job that runs good enough amount of I/O that doesn't whitelist slow ops, because they just tend, like, these warnings just tend to pop up, and that's a bit like that's the one that I've never objected to whitelisting. But things like PG degraded or OSD down or MON down, those are definitely things that shouldn't happen. Unfortunately, again, due to the fact that this was broken for a while, I think there are cases where these warnings pop up when the cluster is just being initialized and just getting started. When just one monitor is up, and then 3 monitors are up, and then just there are no OSDs, and then there's one OSD, and so on. And I think in some cases, some folks may have run into kind of those kind of occurrences, and then added these warnings to the allow list for the entire job. Because if the job is just exercising some aspect of librrbd or some particular Radius API, OSD should not be going down.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it also kind of points to a usability problem if we're having a bunch of warnings popping up when clusters are being set up initially, or could be pretty confusing for users.
Okay, so it sounds like I'm not hearing. Oh, go ahead.
It's been a long time since I spent much of my workday doing these, but lots of tests depend on these checks. Like, we'll, run a file system scrub and then, shut down and assume that if there was an error, then it will have populated the log as a warning, and so then the test will fail. So I think we still have enough tests that don't run in Ceph ADM that we've been getting good coverage, but if converting to Ceph ADM means all those tests break unless they get manually updated, that's going to be a problem. So I think we need to keep them alive.
No,
sure.
so those, I don't think, like, if there is a test that is not generating any warnings, and then does some things and then expect no warnings to be generated, that's actually a good test, and it doesn't need any allow lists in its
Right,
definition.
but it
It
does.
just needs this check to work, right? It just needs
Yes,
this check to work,
exactly.
right?
Yeah,
Right,
so
and
we definitely
yeah,
need this check to exist.
yeah. So if
Yeah,
if
that's
we
not
need
true,
this check
Ilya.
to
It
work,
still needs a allow list for the stuff you expect to have happen every time, right?
I'm sorry, I
That's
didn't
true
get
too.
that.
We have tests where we deliberately do things like kill OSDs, so we whitelist that because we know that's going to happen. But we still need to get the checks for the other kinds of failures that we're trying to make sure we're not seeing.
The allow
Right.
lists allow you
But
to
anyway,
distinguish between expected warnings and unexpected warnings. So I'm
but I mean,
on team. This
if
is a pretty important feature that has to be duplicated, and you should start with what the Ceph task already does.
yeah. But my understanding is that this PR enables the log scanning because we just weren't doing that at all, right?
Right,
Like we
this
just
PR
weren't
just
checking for
fixes
warnings.
it for
Yeah,
the Ceph ADM task. So the log
yeah,
scanning is happening today as expected for the Ceph task, so for the old way of doing
yeah,
things. But the Ceph ADM suite as a whole, because it obviously is based on Ceph ADM, and then any job in any other suite that was converted to the Ceph ADM way of deploying Ceph, those jobs currently, essentially just don't grep for these warnings.
yeah.
If we
So you asked
once
if that was worth still doing, and the answer is, oh God,
yes,
yes, unless someone
yes.
proactively goes
Okay,
through and
so
fixes everything.
so in that case, I think the action is on the Ceph ADM team to get this PR to basically pick this PR up and fix the orchestrator suite so that it remains green when this PR is merged. And I guess there is a bit of work on the Raiders side, like Laura said, there are some jobs that have been converted to Ceph ADM and may also need fixing. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, and a lot of it I predict will translate between the org suite and the Rados suite.
Yeah, if you actually have it
same.
symlinked, right? If you actually have it symlinked, then this would be completely automatic. Yeah, so the
Right.
bulk of the work here is Adam and whoever he delegates this to, I think.
Is Adam on the call? Adam King?
He's not.
Okay.
Are people talking to him? Like we should do this before Reef goes out, so it's not a poke along sort of PR.
Maybe we
I'd
can
rather
start
merge it and see breakage than not have it done in time.
maybe we can start an email chain and loop Adam in after this. Just so he knows.
I think he's aware of this PR. He actually commented on it, and I think he was the one who kind of raised the option of just, going the other way and just always ignoring all these failures. So yeah, I think we just need to ping him and let him know that the failures are there to stay, and it is the orchestrator suite that needs fixing.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah, just as long as he knows what the conclusion of this is and everything. Good. And whatever whenever this goes through testing, even though a lot of it's symlinked, it should go through the orchestrator suite and the Rados suite and others if like, for instance, the FS suite uses the Ceph ADM task, that should go through too, but those are just the two that for sure come to mind. All right. Was there anything further that anybody wanted to comment on this? Because I wrote our conclusion down, but if there's anything else, please go ahead. Oh, okay. Sam, I need to drop soon. Can we go to Nitson's topic? That's totally fine with me. Gal, are you okay with going after Nitson?
Yeah. No problem with that. It's okay.
All right. Nitson, go ahead. Your topic is next.
I actually don't see him. Who added that topic?
Hmm. Was it,
I actually don't see
Oh,
the topic. It used to be
I
I
think
there,
it
think
but
was
it
it
got
got
removed.
removed.
removed. It was
It
Yeah,
there
was
last
removed.
minute. It got removed. Oh, okay, got it.
yeah. I think it's
Never mind.
because you closed the PR, so there's nothing to discuss.
I mean, there
Or
actually
maybe,
is a brief thing to discuss. So that I can do it. So the topic is basically this: when we create temporary PG mappings on the primary OSD during peering, we don't consider primary affinity at all. So arguably, that's a thing we should probably fix. Although that logic is pretty complicated, and modifications there have significant ramifications. So it's arguably not that important. So the price here is that when we mark an OSD out, it has a fairly high probability of coming back in as a primary while its replacement is being backfilled. So I don't know. So I guess the first topic, to the extent that there is one, is how big a deal is that? And the second topic Nitzan noticed when he was trying to make a reproducer for this is that if you mark all of the OSDs with a primary affinity less than 1, you have you have a modest probability of ending up with a primary affinity 0 OSD as the primary, because if all of the OSDs reject, we always pick the first one. That's the PR I closed, and my argument is that that's actually not worth fixing, since that scenario is pretty weird. So, thoughts on those two topics?
yeah, I completely agree with the second one. Not only because this behavior just makes very little sense. If you don't allow, like, if there's not a single OSD with the primary affinity of 1, then this means that like you don't want any OSD to be primary, and this leaves us or the cluster to choose whichever OSD it sees fit to be the primary. So that actually makes sense to me. And also the other reason is because this is a client-facing change that is going to need to propagate to all the clients. There would need to be a feature bit and all of that.
It's
and,
equivalent in complexity to straw 2.
right?
Yeah.
And for pretty much nothing, right? This is just so that the primary affinity of, just so that this very weird case is handled slightly better. So I don't see any value in that. The first topic that you brought up, the PG temp mappings, that's not like this. I'm not, like you said, that it's complex, but at the very least, it's not like it wouldn't need to go all the way up to the clients. You would just need to fix how the PG
it actually
temp
might.
mappings are. Oh, okay. In that case, I can, yeah, because I assumed that you would just need to fix how the PG temp mappings are calculated, and that the client
For
would just see.
replicated PGs, yes, but erasure-coded PGs are more complicated. We don't. So the
Right.
challenge here
Right.
is that the OSD map just assumes that for the temporary mapping, the first one is the primary, and that's sufficient for replicated PGs since we can control the order, but it's not sufficient for erasure-coded PGs.
Can you combine that with primary? Because there is PG temp and then there is primary temp. Can that be combined together?
Yeah, that's probably what we'd have to do.
Yeah.
So anyway,
that
it's
way,
that and the message we use to communicate this to the monitor would have to change.
yeah, but that would still be, contained within the cluster and not client facing, which means that this is actually feasible.
Potentially. I would need to look at how
That's like,
primary
yeah,
temp
I
works.
don't
That's
think this
after
is
the
worth
last
the
time I looked at it
development
recently.
time.
This one might actually be worth it, but it's definitely not urgent. It would be sometime in the next year kind of thing. The reason why it's weird is that it's the workflow we expect people to do is to mark a failing disk with primary affinity 0 and then mark it out. So it's disconcerting for them to see that OSD pop back in as primary immediately, which is what happens.
Right, but that only happens if they're marking out enough of them that have primary affinity 0 or like nothing has.
No, just a single one. Because we don't consider primary affinity literally at all in this scenario. We make we choose one of the best log options as the primary, and that's it.
Right, but that only happens if the new acting set has no overlap with the old acting set, or with the old offset.
Oh, is that right? Do we
Yeah,
prefer someone
it's
in
yeah,
the
yeah,
acting status to
the
primary?
reason this was the reason this was happening in the bug was because there was no overlap at all.
No, that was an
Like what you're
observation that it was happening.
well, okay, it was going from to an entirely new set of OSDs where none of them had any history at all. And yeah, I'm pretty sure that if there's an up OSD that has log, then that's the one that gets put in. Or
In
sorry,
that case, I'm
it
not
has
really worried about it.
Yeah, yeah. This has always looked weird. The primary affinity has a new spin on it, but I think this basic behavior has always been a thing, and it's just you
Yeah,
have to
it's
have like
definitely
weird
always been a
ones that
thing.
like a lot out.
That's not the argument. The argument is that it's weird. Okay, I think that topic's dead then.
And for bringing that up. So it looks like we had a PR that was closed now, but we still want to address it at some point. Is there anything else anybody wanted to? Oh, go ahead.
I think we don't want to address it. It was raised in response to a bug report, but it's more complicated than initially realized, and also less impactful.
Sure. Awesome. Is there anything else anybody wanted to conclude on this topic? All right. If not, thanks, Sam, for bringing it up. The next topic is Gal Solomon's updates on S3 Select.
Okay, hi. Can I share my screen now? It's okay?
Yeah, go for it.
1 second. Okay, hi. My name is Gal Solomon, and I'm a member of the Rados Gateway team. For the last 3 years, we are developing the S3 Select. This talk is mainly an introduction to S3 Select. I'm going to talk about the concept. I will explain what it is, why do we need that, how does it work, and please feel free to ask any question at any point. So first, in July 2020, S3 Select was introduced to Ceph upstream. AWS actually done it 2 years before that. S3 Select is another S3 request. It enables the client to push down an SQL statement into the Ceph storage. And I must note that this SQL dialect is according to AWS spec. S3 Select is a new S3 capability. It's designed to pull out only a subset of the data that you need. And this can dramatically improve the performance and reduce the cost of application that need to access the data in S3. And it should be noted that S3 Select request implementation inherits from get object operation request from C++ perspective. So I can say that S3 Select is kind of get object on steroids. The SQL expression and its processing is the main difference versus the get object. All of this I'm going to discuss later in later slides. Okay, so why do we need that? What is it good for? The pushdown paradigm is about moving or pushing the operation close to the data, and it's contrary to what is commonly done, meaning moving the data to the place of operation. So push down does not consume memory, while caching does consume memory. And in a big data ecosystem, it makes a big difference. Upon using cache paradigm, the flow is about what data to keep in cache and what data should invalidate. upon using the pushdown, which is actually the S3 select, the flow is about what operation should push down and how to use the return results. So let's take an example. In order to execute SQL query, something like select sum of x plus y, where a plus b is bigger than c. In order to execute that query, it needs to fetch the entire object to the client side, and only then to execute the operation with some kind of analytic application. With pushdown, which is the S3 select, the entire operation is executed on the server side, and only the result is returned to the client side. An SQL query that needs to operate on CSV or JSON object and that contains many columns and rows, but needs only a very small portion of it, only a few columns or small percentage of the rows, will return a small amount of data. It means actually less operations of serialization and deserialization. And it should be noted also that pushing down operations close to the data, it's not an easy thing to do. The storage is usually fragmented and broken into random pieces. It makes it quite difficult to execute single query on top of many random pieces. Moreover, the type of these objects could be binary in some cases. Okay, and what is S3 select capable of? S3 select does not turn our S3 storage into a database. That's should keep in mind, but it does improve greatly the efficiency of the SQL processing. It should be noted that the SQL dialect that provided by the S3 select is for read-only. It's only the select statement portion. There is no notion of schema or table, and object being read should enable the tabular operation. S3 select system is embedded into the get object module, which makes it highly efficient for the push down operation. Upon SQL query being pushed down, the object is fetched, and each fragment of the object is processed by the S3 select module. And since the S3 select is embedded into the S3 system, there are no redundant copies of bytes, and the object is processed immediately, and the results sent back to the client. Moreover, the S3 select system is capable of processing different types of objects, such as CSV, JSON, and Parquet. And Parquet is a unique structure, and we're going to discuss this later about this kind of format, Parquet format. And must note also that the same engine is processing these different object types. Okay, and maybe another question that somebody might ask is why using SQL and not something else. So the question also will be what should be asked here is what is needed for machine learning, and SQL is needed for the machine learning since in practice this is the language for querying data. It should be noted also that SQL is a domain-specific language, more than 40 years. It was designed initially for manipulating data. In a machine learning workflow, the data is the main thing. It is the source. And the more relevant and accurate the data that you have, and the better your modeling and pattern detection will be. So you also should keep in mind that the data must be formatted so that it can be used by the machine learning algorithm for improved pattern detection. All of this makes the SQL the starting point for the machine learning. Adding the capability to read and process different and common data sources such as CSV, JSON, and Parquet makes that the S3 select a really powerful tool for machine learning. And okay, and why S3 select is so useful for the S3 storage? Our S3 storage, as you probably know, reliable, efficient, relatively cheap, A typical Ceph user may aggregate along the years tons of objects. These objects contain huge amount of data, structured and unstructured. And this massive amounts of data is sitting there, kind of a cold state, and the data that reside there could be quite precious. But to know about that, how precious it is, it needs to extract this data from the storage, and that could be very, very expensive. This kind of operation, extracting data from storage, consumes a lot of network and also CPU for serialization and deserialization. So using S2Select on this cold and non-accessible data makes the S2Select cost-effective for analytical operations. Our goal is to make the Ceph object storage more attractive for analytical operation and not just for storing data. I want to make some points related to the software design that should be noted. The engine itself is header only. There are no libraries, with one exception, which is the Apache Arrow. It's for the Parquet reader. The S2Select is a single-threaded function. It reuses memory for its operation. There is no intensive allocation or deallocation. The memory that is consumed by the engine is enough for the roving process. So for that reason, the engine is able to process any size object. Readers of the different object types are decoupled from the SQL engine. So future readers for other data types, such as ORC, will reuse the same engine code. It is also a standalone application. The same S2Select engine can be used from the command line as a shell command, and it can process the different data types, the CSV, JSON, and Parquet, not just embedded into Ceph. If there are any questions until now, I'll be glad to answer them. I will continue to describe now the different flow for the different data types. We'll start with the CSV. Okay. Okay, so some explanation about as for the flow of each type of the differences between the different data source. CSV is the most simple format. It is not supporting data types. It has some kind of a trivial schema support. We can say that almost every log file could become a CSV object. JSON is much more complex, sophisticated format. It supports data types and actually also it supports schema. Upon processing a query, this both format, the CSV and JSON, should read and scan completely the entire object. On the other hand, Parquet is a highly advanced object. It contains enough metadata that enables the user to access only the data needed for the query processing. That means that by using Parquet object, it is not just saving network bandwidth in the return results, but it's also save a lot of IOPS on the server side. Okay, so now we discuss a bit about the CSV flow itself. In the case of the CSV, the Rados gateway fetches chunk after chunk. The S2Select engine processes each chunk, and the results are sent back immediately upon completion. In this type of processing, a chunk may break a row in the middle, and these broken rows are not processed, but they are saved for the later and merge with the next chunk. So to summarize, the S2Select engine processes row after row and send an immediate response with no preloading. Okay, as for Parquet. Parquet is binary object. It's a columnar object. We'll explain about that a bit more. This type of object contains a lot of metadata. It enables the reader to skip non-necessary information. When I'm saying non-necessary information, I think about a Parquet object which contain a lot of columns, let's say 100 or 200 columns, and your query only need to access a few of them, let's say 3 of them. The Parquet actually enables to the Parquet reader and also for the SQL parser to extract only these 3 columns, to skip the data and not scanning it. It's a huge reduction of IOPS. Okay, so at first the engine verifies that the magic bytes. It makes sure that it's a valid Parquet object. For the next step, the engine fetches the predicate columns. The predicate columns, I mean the where clause. In the case of the predicate return true, it fetches the projection columns and calculates the projection statement. Parquet object, as mentioned, is structured. It contains schema. This unique columnar structure enables, as I said before, to skip data and eventually save a lot of IOPS. As for the main differences between the Parquet reader and the CSV reader, in the CSV flow, the Rados gateway fetches chunk after chunk, and the process it each separately. Actually, the Rados gateway controls the start and the end of the process. In the case of Parquet, the engine itself issue read range request, and the engine itself, the engine of STSelect, control the start and the end of the process. Okay, now the following slides I will explain about the JSON. The JSON is quite a unique structure, quite challenging, I must say. We are, let's say, already finished about 80 to 90% of its development. So this a bit weird slide. I try to explain why JSON reader is a unique compared to other readers. Upon querying a JSON document, the STSelect engine is focusing only on specific parts of the nested and complex JSON data, not on the whole JSON data. So it means that only specific parts of the JSON documents are loaded into the SQL engine for processing. You can see here in this example, the SQL statement is focusing, it's processing on specific parts of the documents according to the from clause. The from clause here saying from S3 object root.glossary.glossdiv.glosslist gloss entry, which actually trigger the reader to look for a specific path and to start from there to load a specific columns into the STSelect engine. So you can say that the from clause define the boundaries where to get the projection and the predicate column. And in the next slide, you can see in this statement, which is different from the previous one, but it's the same document. And this from clause, which what he defined differently from the previous one, it's the boundaries of the row. So, so in this statement, the reader is actually will load only different parts of the document compared to the previous one. This makes the JSON reader quite unique to other readers. So to summarize all of this, the JSON reader is similar to the CSV. The whole object must be scanned and read completely because there's no way to skip data in the JSON. It's a text file. But it means that the Rados gateway, of course, fetch chunk after chunk. But in the JSON case, the JSON reader controls the flow. And this is because the unique structure of the JSON, only the JSON reader, and by the SQL statement, can determine when all columns are read, and it is the time to call the SQL processing. Okay, another reported issue is the scale up. The scale up issue is currently is already designed and actually also already implemented. It's not on upstream, but it's really important one. I mean, there's no way to run SQL query without scaling the query in our system. So must say that the ability of processing a data stream without preload and read ahead is essential for processing huge amount of data. It's from memory consumption perspective. And this is achieved by the processing the row after row until the end of the stream. It's quite similar to the Linux pipe concept. Having that, SSelect function consume really little memory. SSelect is able to split the query processing and merge the result upon completion into a single result. This is a powerful feature for big data ecosystem. In the next slide, I will explain a bit more about how it is done. Okay, so as you can see here, the way to improve dramatically the processing of a huge amount of data is by splitting the data into non-overlap ranges. That is, the system should run the same query on non-overlap data ranges in parallel, of course, and merge the result upon completion, and return them to the client as a single result. It should note that per data type, the data splitting process is different. In the case of the CSV, the object is split according to the object size and the row delimiter. In the case of Parquet, this unique columnar structure is already divided into logical groups, and that's why it makes it quite easy to divide it into non-overlap ranges. The JSON use case is more complex. So one way to handle that is getting the data returned on many objects and split the work according to the amount of objects. In this slide, I want to demonstrate why scaling up could be quite complex. So you can see here an aggregation query. Select substring of some constant text with aggregation function like a minimum or an average and count. The minimum and average are actually arguments for the substring function. And in this case, the S3 select is divided into 3 parallel run. The mid stage calculate and summarize the results of the first stage, and the final stage is merging the results. You need to understand that the SSelect engine need to analyze the query and to know per each function how to actually merge the results. In the case of minimum is the minimum of the all minimum. In the case of average, you need to have a specific flow how to make an average of all averages of each of the different run. And what you get finally is, of course, is a much powerful run. It's could be 3 times, in this case, could be 3 times faster than a single query, of course. Okay, some about challenges ahead of us. Integration with Spark and Trino. Okay, so SQL analytic applications such as Spark, Presto, or Trino may use object storage for their backend storage, as we know. But as said, it's quite inefficient use of the storage. This is because it needs to retrieve all objects participating in the query. But if they know the Trino, the Spark analytic application would know how to push down the query to in our case, to Ceph, using the S3 select request instead of the get object, it will improve the query performance dramatically. The S3 select is actually, and you can say that it's actually kind of optimizer for this high-level application. So we also need to understand that there is a great advantage using SQL Analytic application since so many end users applications are written for Spark and Trino. And what is needed from this analytical application is to identify what parts of the query can be pushed down to the S3 storage, and send this subquery as a S3 select request. And I must mention that this type of optimizer already exists in AWS EMR. This kind of integration, and you must pay attention to this article. This article was published last November. It's about AWS and Trino joint effort. They improve and upgrade the Trino software and also contribute it to the open source. They ran TPCDS benchmark in the scale of 3 terabytes on that integration of Trino and AWS S3 Select. As you can see, the results are quite impressive. It's about 9 times faster. The overall reduction of total data processing about 21 times better. So it's quite impressive, I think. Okay, another future implementation that we are thinking of is a single query on many objects, and I want to discuss a bit what is the advantage of that. I think the advantage of processing huge size objects using S3 Select is quite obvious. We already discussed that. But what if it needs to run query on many small and medium-sized objects? This may happen because sometimes the data comes in small packages or from several sources, or the data may spread on many buckets on directories. Think about time series applications. So these kind of features allow you to perform queries without any size limitation, which is really a great thing. And also it should be noted that AWS S3 Select operates only on a single object and not on many. Another thing, it's quite easy to experiment S3 Select. You don't need to run the whole Ceph or something like that. You can actually run it from the shell command. Of course, you should review the GitHub repo of S3 Select. I will show some example how to run this on your local file system. Okay, so put here some examples how to run S3 Select as a standalone application. The first example, as you can see here, is the SQL statement. It's processing a standard output of the PS command. It processes the input as a CSV type. Now, please note that the SQL statement uses the column names like the PID, CMD, the parent PID, and the column names extracted from the PS command using the CSV header info environment variable, which indicates that there is a header. And since the PS, this first row of the PS is the column names, so you can use that in this case. Now, without the column names, it's possible to use, of course, the column position, _1, _2, and so forth. In the second example, again, the standard output of the sequence command shell. But this time it uses an existing, already existing container, and the input data is piped into the container. Now, I must mention that this container consists of all the necessary packages, including the Apache Arrow, and also build utilities. So it's quite easy for anyone to use this container to review the code, to change it, to rebuild it, and whatever you want to do. In the last example here, Also, we're using the same container, but in this case, it mounts the host directory into the container directory and enable the user to run f2select on any file. You can use it on Parquet, JSON, CSV. Yeah, that's it. And I really glad to hear any comment or question or anything else.
A really comprehensive and well put together presentation, by the way. And
Okay.
my question was, so you talked about S3 select, operating on different types like CSV versus JSON. Would there ever be an instance where you're dealing with mixed types at once, or is it always? I saw how you issued the commands. You would always issue them, like if you wanted to parse CSV and then a JSON, you would never do
Yeah,
something
you're right. Yeah.
at the same time.
First of all, it's a great idea because think about that. Application may produce a mixed of data in different format, CSV, JSON, and maybe also Parquet, and all of them together making some kind of sense. Some data scientists may say, "Look, I want to make a single query on all of this." So there is. Since I know a bit about this S2select, there's no. It is possible to do that with JSON. It's a bit difficult because JSON actually Parquet and CSV are quite naturally can join together because it's the same syntax. But the JSON, if you look at the JSON, you can see that it impacts the syntax of the SQL. You actually need to describe the form clause, which is different from the CSV in Parquet, and also in the projection, again, you can also need to describe the path of each data. You need to describe the path, and this is a problem because you don't have it in CSV. So a query which define how to query a JSON document will not work on CSV. But maybe it's worth checking it. Maybe there is a way to do that. I don't know. Some kind of a flat JSON, maybe. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was like can be thought of as a limitation, or you wouldn't even have that use case, and it wouldn't be worth it,
Now, JSON is the problem. JSON simply define a different syntax in some parts. I mean, it's the same function exactly. It's almost the same flow. I mean, it's the same SQL engine for all of them. But there is a part in the SQL parser where each of the path, each value becomes some kind of index in the scratch area of the SQL engine. And this part is very unique for the JSON, so you cannot combine. So upon defining a SQL query, it won't work. It might not work on CSV, but maybe there is a way to think about it. Maybe there is a way to a special plugin which reduce something, and then you can run it. Also, if let's say if the suffix is the same, you can do something. I don't know. It's something that you need to think about joining, as you're saying, you had the same, you're correct, joining the same query on different format, JSON and CSV in this case, yes.
Makes sense.
I have a question that is more related to Parquet itself than S3 Select. So my understanding is that this is a columnar format, meaning that the columns are stored together, presumably contiguously, so that they can be easily skipped and also compressed and whatnot. But you also mentioned that for parallelization, right, the divide and conquer style of processing, Parquet is also provides some efficiency benefits. But in that case, you're dividing by rows and not by columns. So I was wondering how that works and what sort of smarts are built into the Parquet format to support that use case.
Good question. I don't have a slide for that, but there is a notion in Parquet which calls row groups. What they are doing there, it's actually the chunk is which reside on the format object is contiguous. It's actually it packages into a chunk after chunk after chunk after chunk, and you have a notion of a row groups. The notion of row groups means that you have a chunk of column 1 reside to chunk of column 2, reside to chunk of column 3, and so forth. Okay, so try to imagine that you have a group of chunks. Each chunk belongs to a different column. And upon query processing, you actually you know how to jump to the specific chunk that you need. So in the case you want to parallelize the processing on such an object, you need to divide. Let's say your Parquet has 1,000 row groups, okay, and you have 8 cores, and you can launch 8. Let's say 8 S3 requests on the same object. So you need to divide these row groups for about 125 per each query. Okay, and this 135 row groups will actually have you have chunk reside next to another chunk of each chunk is contiguous a list of values per each column. I hope I makes myself clear with a good slide. Actually, it's quite obvious, this kind of thing. You can actually see that in Apache Arrow Parquet. There is a nice slide there that actually explain how this Parquet file is divided into columns, row groups, and chunks within these row groups. I hope it's clear.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I was missing that it's
Okay.
that the column is not completely contiguous. If it's also
Exactly.
If it's also kind of divided not just vertically but also horizontally, then that makes perfect sense.
Exactly. By the way, I want to mention another thing. Upon integration of Trino with S3 Select, Trino itself, why it's so important to have Trino integrating into our system, and also why AWS thought it's so important, and why you get so much 9 times better. One reason for that, it is because the Trino can actually parallelize its operation. It can actually divide what it does, and I'm testing that on our system now. It actually divides the object into several parts. Okay, it actually knows, because it's in a full engine. The Trino is a full engine, and it knows how to split the data, run dedicated the same query, of course, for the different parts of the object, and then merge the results. And that is why it's so important to have this Trino integration into our system. It's not just because you have so many end users that are using Trino. This is a very good reason, of course, but also because it's very efficient. If you run Trino on some file on your local system, you can see that it runs parallel a query on that object. So, but compared to what I described as a parallel, it does it in a different way. It uses the scan range of the get object. It actually measures the CSV. Let's say it says, okay, it's 1 gigabyte, so I will divide it into several parts. Of course, non-overlap parts, and it will issue a different request for each of these parts, and then merge the results. This is the Trino capability, and upon having a good integration with this analytical application such as Trino, we get that for free. This parallel feature. Yeah.
Very cool.
Hey, Gal, I had a question. In the past, there'd been interest in the idea of pushing queries all the way down to the OSDs. Is there
Yeah.
still interest in that? Do you think there are
I
benefits?
Yeah, from my perspective, yes. I think it will be great. Although I heard some say that there were questions about, and maybe you know better, about the scheduling of the OSD. Can it consume this? Because actually we're talking about OSD is more difficult, but we can cope with that. The question is whether it can schedule correctly all of these push down queries. And I mean, these queries are going to work in serialized manner or going to work in parallel manner. That's one question that somebody raised. And another thing that somebody raised, it was that okay, it's fragmented because the data is fragmented. You need to have a specific flow, but this thing that could be resolved. But directly to your question, yes, I think we should push down, and hopefully, because we're going to load the CPU, the OSD, we need to figure out if it's a good thing to do, or maybe to split it between the Rados gateway and the OSD. It's something that we need to check. But yeah, I think we should push down to OSD.
Cool. My understanding is that as long as there are reads, the OSD can run multiple reads on the same object at the same time.
Okay, that's something to check. I think it was some time ago, so I know somebody make an issue on that. Okay, I think I recall now. If it's too long, okay, if the data fragment that should be processed in the OSD might take too long, it might break in the middle. I'm not sure if that was the concern, but I think I remember something like that about too long processing in the OSD. While in the Rados gateway, there's no such thing as too long, as far as I know.
Right. I think you're referring to the suicide timeout in the OSD, probably.
Yeah. Not I don't recall this notion, but yeah, somebody said about scheduling issue. Yeah. And in that case, we need to build something that to avoid that from this suicide parameter or something like that. To know to return the result and know how to get back to the place where we stopped the processing. This is a different thing, but we don't have the right now. But again, I think it's worth doing it because it's down there. It's pushing down even further, and it probably will gain some more efficiency by pushing down to the OSD.
So I think we'd have to implement that with CLS.
Yeah.
Rados folks would know, are there still issues with CLS reading replicated pools or erasure coded pools, or is there a way to do that from CLS now?
I don't recall. So, can you remind me, when did you see this issue? How far does this go back? Nothing has changed recently.
I remember, I think it was at least 2 years ago, probably, when we were trying to do prefetching of head objects in CLS. We weren't able to do that because we couldn't read data from erasure coded pools.
Yeah, I don't remember anything off the top of my head that has changed there, but yeah, it's worth double checking.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Even if it could make sense to push things into the OSD, this is A, not the only way to do it, but B, I don't know if that's I don't know if that's the next. I don't think that is the next move for this. I think integrating it with the more fully into the RWU tier would probably come first.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's my current things to do is the tuner integration. It's highly important.
Anything more on this topic? Gal, by the way, if you have the link to your presentation, totally fine if you don't, but if you do, send it in the chat and I'll link it to the tracker for this meeting.
Okay, I will do so.
Thanks, that was a great presentation.
Thanks a lot.
All right, if there's no more to say on S3 Select, I can go to the next topic. So this next topic is mine and Ashwarya's, our updates on the logical large-scale suite in tautology, our developments on that. Yes, Ashwarya here. So I'll give a brief overview of what this is, and then I'll let Ashwarya talk about more specifics. So essentially, she and I have been working on developing a logical large-scale suite for tautology based on a feature I implemented a while back for Quincy called Blue Store Zero Block Detection. And this feature skips zeroed buffered lists, so with the goal of allowing more disk space to OSDs so that we can run tests on, so right now there's a limitation on how many OSDs we can allot for tests in tautology, and we would like to run tests with multiple OSDs or many OSDs more than what we're doing now. So that would be the goal of using Blue Store Zero Block Detection in development with this new logical large-scale suite. So there's been a lot of groundwork steps that have gone into it. The first step being the Blue Store Zero Block Detection feature, which has been merged, and it's a feature that can be enabled via a Blue Store configuration. It's off by default since it's meant for testing purposes, but that's if you need to visualize it, that's where it could be found in the config settings for Blue Store, and it can be enabled on OSDs. And Ashwarya has done is working on more groundwork now to actually set up the logical large scale suite. So I'll let her talk on some steps that are going into that and some groundwork that is laid out for the feature.
Thanks, Laura. So I started off working on seeing how we can increase the number of OSDs in our tests. And I started looking into how we currently do disk partitioning on our Smithy nodes. And it's something that's statically defined currently. With David Galloway and Zach's help, I was able to do a POC sort of experiment where I was able to change the number of disk partitions I wanted. And with the Ceph Ansible tasks, make that work. But we've realized that if we want it to be a part of our entire test flow, we need to have a separate Ansible task, which kind of looks at the size of a disk, and we can tell it that these are the number of partitions we want according to how many OSDs the test has, and then we partition the disk. So that's what I'm currently working on. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it from me. I'll let Laura talk more about how the Blue Store Zero Detection stuff will work once we can run multiple OSDs.
Yeah, and just to clarify, Ashwarya, you've been able to do this locally using the Ceph Ansible secrets repository, but the blocker there
Right.
is just that it's not accessible publicly for like a new tautology suite, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So I was able to modify the secrets repository locally and use that file. There's a Smithy YAML file inside it, which is used to look up for the disk partitioning. But the problem with that is because it's a private repository, we can't really specify that, okay, like pull this repository and use this branch instead of the main branch with my changes. So it can't work with the tautology suite command. To make that work is why we're looking into an Ansible task where we could do this more dynamically.
Thanks. And the second groundwork step I've been working on or have worked on is this PR, which I've linked to our tracker here. But this PR is a new work unit I've designed around booster zero block detection. For right now in tautology, we have it enabled for some of our tests, just so we have some coverage there. But this PR is a specific work unit I've designed around the feature that demonstrates the use of zeroed objects and how it doesn't fill up the space. So the goal of this work unit is, one, we can simply get more test coverage in the regular tautology suite. I designed it so it can be run along with the other Rados singleton tests. We have like some PG autoscaler tests in that suite as well. So and other things around there. So it would just pull this work unit. But since this work unit, it doesn't depend on a certain size number of OSDs to perform. The goal of this would also be for Ashwarya once we have, actual the partitioning available publicly, she would be able to pull this work unit that I've designed and use it on a very large number of OSDs. And since it's a config option as well, we can compare the difference between how the disks fill up. We can try it with booster zero block detection disabled, see that the disks fill up a lot, and then try it enabled and check the difference between the disks filling up. And of course, the overall goal would be that the disk space given to an OSD would be lesser, so that we could perform for tests like we do on the Gibba cluster, or take the same logic that's going on in the Gibba cluster with how large it is and translate it into our tests. And that's where we're at right now. We plan to give more updates as this comes into action, but it's mostly just a lot of groundwork steps that have to be laid for it to be set up. But we've made a lot of progress since we last spoke at CDM, so we wanted to give an update. Does anybody have any questions about like the feature or the work that's gone into it, or the overall goal, stuff like that? Or if there's anything that was, I need to clarify, just let me know. Well, looks like no questions, but if that changes, feel free to email me or ping me or anything, and I can answer more questions as needed. Because, perhaps since this is a config option, perhaps somebody would have another use case for it they'd want to try, and I'd be happy to answer questions about that. Thanks, Ashwarya, for speaking on that.
Thanks, Laura.
Cool. The next topic and our final topic is from Ali, Casey, and Ilya on perf dump JSON output. Can this be set in stone, or can it be tweaked with a release note in a major release? And there's an associated PR here. I'll let you guys take it away.
So I just spoke with Yuri, and she commented on this PR, and it appears that at least for Reef, we could tweak the format, though we should test it and make sure that that nothing breaks, and if something does, that we fix that as soon as possible. Taking one step back, would we want to have a separate command for just the labeled counters, or have it all in the same command? At first I wanted to separate the two, but now since there doesn't seem to be as much of a distinction if the formats are very similar, maybe we keep them in the same command. I'm not sure if Casey or Ilya or anybody else following has an opinion on this.
Wasn't there a suggestion in the discussion to emit both formats in the same JSON?
Well, the problem with emitting both types of counters in the same JSON is that it's unless we make the output irregular, it wouldn't be backwards compatible. And this question is so this question is really not so much around this particular PR, but more towards whether the output of an admin socket command, in this case perf dump, I guess, is a kind of a very special admin socket command because that's the oldest one. It goes back, it's at this point I think it's like 12 years old, I think. So there may be people who are parsing this output like on their own, and perhaps relying on just selecting or querying a particular value of a particular group of perf counters. And if we change the output format for unlabeled counters, even if it's just a very minor change, such as we just add an additional labels key to that dictionary, that would break those tools or those scripts that people might have.
I just want to say that I would treat adding one label differently than breaking the whole format. I think this is something that we should allow ourselves to do.
Yeah, so this is the question, right? So we've never promised any sort of, like, we've never said that this would be set in stone, right? And we generally reserve the right to change output, whether it's a CLI command or in this case this is an admin socket, on major releases, right? As long as it's documented, as long as there was a release note, that is considered acceptable, and we've done that in the past. The reason that I'm a little worried about this particular one is, like I said, this is a very old command. It's perhaps the oldest command that people might actually be relying on and kind of manually parsing its output, just because it's been there for so long and way before any of the other monitoring capabilities showed up. So I think this one is just a little bit special. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is that the current proposal is actually that we're not just adding a labels key to a dictionary. So it's not just a single key. Ali is considering a more invasive change to how perf counters are dumped. So if you look at one of the most recent comments, there are examples there, and we're basically talking about taking the entire performance counters dictionary, if that makes sense, and moving it under a key that is named counters. So it's essentially there's going to be an outer dictionary around what is there today, and that is definitely going to break any JQ query, or if it's not JQ, then it's going to break even faster if there is an additional layer of indirection there.
Yeah.
So the change as it's currently proposed is going to break is definitely going to break existing tools, and the use case that I have in mind in particular is someone getting a particular perf counter, right? So fetching a particular, maybe it's not a single perf counter, but a set of perf counters, let's say something related to Blue Store, and then processing that, as opposed to a kind of a blanket sort of thing that Ceph Exporter would do there, where it would just slurp all counters and dump them without paying attention to what is actually dumped. So it's just a textual processing exercise, whereas the tools that I have in mind is like they're actually making sense of a particular perf counter and expected to obviously to be one level or two levels deep into this JSON that perf dump returns. If we change the number of levels there, that's obviously going to break. That said, the counter argument to that is that if we wanted to, like in the future, once the labeled perf counters infrastructure, once it lands, there is probably going to be a gradual conversion, at least for perf counters that at least for those perf counters for which it makes sense for them to be labeled, right? So for the ones that we currently embed some sort of name in the perf counter itself, that would be a natural candidate for conversion to label, because that would actually align with established practices in Prometheus, for example, and other monitoring tools. Once we do that, that's obvious, like that would obviously break that particular perf counter anyway, because unless we go so far as to provide both the old perf counter and the new perf counter and dump the same values, right, just under different names, which I don't think we want to do, this use case would be broken one way or the other anyway, just slightly down the road. So the question is, can we just pull the plug today, or not today, in Reef, with a big release note around it, or do we need to engage in trickery and potentially try to make this more accommodating, such as like instead of adding this extra layer in the dictionary, maybe try to get by with by adding just a single key, or maybe even just introduce a whole new command for that would dump both labeled and unlabeled perf counters and leave the existing perf dump command as is. So there is a bunch of options here, and all of this, like the input to the decision is really how are we actually attached to the current output in any way, and do we know of any consumers of the type that I've just described out there in the wild? Are we afraid of breaking this, or should we basically just the level of, I'm looking for the level of sensitivity with regards to it.
So I think there are a lot of different monitoring systems out there. Not sure that how many would need like all the counters dumped all the time, that sort of thing. But if we're considering a semantic change to how the interface works, I suggest just using a new command.
Right, and new command is very like it's appealing, but it's like it's really not clear how to name it. Right, perf dump is a very self-describing name, and having something else that does the same thing but adds some more counters is potentially confusing. And then going back to the issue that I've raised, that as we start to convert these perf counters, they again, unless we go as far as to maintain the old ones, they're necessarily going to disappear from the old perf dump command and kind of be moved into this new command as time goes by anyway, making the old command potentially useless in the long term anyway. So do folks think that we actually need to maintain the old perf counters alongside the new ones in cases where we actually convert an old perf counter instead of just adding a whole new one which has some labels attached to it?
So from the telemetry point of view, we can accommodate both on the module and on the backend side. So I don't see an issue here, but like Josh said, the other monitoring tools that we need to consider.
Yeah, the telemetry is kind of a weak use case here because that's what we control and that's what we can do pretty much anything with.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's like really what I'm concerned is people, not even an actual monitoring tool, but people running their own scripts that they're quite accustomed to and obviously very attached to because that's their own thing, and that's suddenly breaking just because we want to change some JSON around. That sounds bad. I see Sam.
We do it kind of like the PG dump admin sock command where there's like dump PG's full and dump PG's brief, different flavors sort of. And I could see it's just using like a Python formatter right for the JSON, so you could have like a case where if I'm just imagining like a perf dump labeled, and then if labels add the labeled part, stuff that into the formatter. That's what I'm just envisioning, but that makes sense.
Well, the thing, like the approach where we just selectively add labels for the things that actually have labels, that has a disadvantage again in the long run. In the long term, that has a disadvantage of this output being irregular. So in one case, you would have a label subdictionary, like a bunch of key value pairs that represent labels, and in another case, like instead of having an empty dictionary signifying that there are no labels, this dictionary would just be absent, and that's more pain to parse So if you wanted a JQ query, for example, that would be slightly more complicated than if if this dictionary is always there and can just be either empty or not empty.
Tim has been saying stuff in the chat. Could you?
Right. So it sounds like Sam is saying that. It sounds like Sam is saying that he's looking in the direction of a new command, but then my concern, like the concern that I've raised with the fact that the old command, like when we actually move a counter that it for which it makes sense to be labeled into like once we move it to the labeled framework, Sam's saying that it's fine from his perspective for this counter to just disappear from the old command.
Do we have to disappear? Can it stay in the same place?
We don't, but this would mean that the daemon would need to bump two instances of the same perf counters, and that they may potentially get desynchronized. Like you would have, let's say, value 5 on the one side and 6 on the other side, which is probably not a good idea. And it's just more code in the daemon itself because there would be 2 things to bump instead of 1.
Curious how this is different from like a command we have where it's, or like for instance, Ceph health versus Ceph health detail. Because this seems just like a more detailed option to add labels.
Well, in the case of the perf dump command, there's already 2 arguments that would follow it, which are the instance name of the perf counters and then the actual counter name within that instance, and that's for filtering. And I'm gonna guess if we can't alter that order either, since if we're already having these kind of discussions about the format that's dumped, we can't change the command behavior as well. I think one of the iterations I proposed is just a perf dump labeled, and that would give us a carte blanche at whatever we wanted. And that kind of goes in line with what Sam's saying, but I also
right,
see
but that's a very bad name.
I definitely see Ronan's point too.
Right, but the other like the primary concern that I have with perf dump labeled is that that's a very bad name because this command has to dump all counters, not just the labeled ones. I think we're not like there's no question about is whether there should be a single command that dumps all counters, both labeled and unlabeled, because that would be like having it split between here is where all the old stuff lives and here is where the new stuff lives, and the user and any monitoring tool, including Ceph Exporter, which we're working on, having to run those 2 commands and again getting potential inconsistent results is not good. So
just move the old one then and use perf dump for the new one. Like
well,
if the concern is automation,
break.
it's easy to add _classic. Yeah, but it's a major release. We're allowed to do that on major releases.
So just
I very much agree.
In the level.
I also agree that we should feel free to change the format as long as we release note it, but I still haven't been clear about whether other components of Ceph are consuming these in the JSON format. Does anybody know how these counters get shipped to the manager and consumed by modules? Is that in JSON or is there a different channel? Because if we're changing the format, that's going to cause issues for upgrades. And I do think that we would care about that.
I think Patrick has worked with that a bit on the manager side. Maybe he can comment.
Sorry, I was a little zoned out. What's the question?
Does the format change in the perf counter JSON affect the way that the JSON perf counters are communicated to the manager?
Don't think so, but I also wouldn't trust my thinking. But I'm not sure.
Yeah, I scanned the code and it looked like the admin socket was the only thing calling into this JSON or perf counters collection dump formatted function. And so I couldn't see how it was possible for the manager to consume that, but I could be missing something.
Well, I would be really surprised if it was actually a JSON string that was shipped to the manager, just encoded as a Ceph string. I'm pretty sure that the perf counter collection is getting encoded according to the like type of each counter. So if it's an int, it's an int. If it's an average, it gets encoded with like 3 different values, one of which is a float and whatnot. I don't think it's a JSON. And yeah, so it is for that reason that I'm not really worried about the anything that is internal to Ceph or around Ceph, such as a telemetry project. It's really the external users that I think is that is the major concern here, with their own scripts or monitoring tools that they have running around their Ceph clusters.
Just for clarity's sake, if we were to just change the schema of the perf dump command, would there be potentially a mix of labeled and unlabeled perf counters? Like all of the counters would be there, but some are just changing to labeled perf counters?
Right, as time goes by, that's what would happen. I kind of like Greg's suggestion that we can keep we can keep the perf dump name and reallocate it to the new command that would behave however we want, and have the old one have the old behavior be invoked like with perf underscore dump or something of that sort.
I
So
think
that
that kind
it's
of
one line.
makes it pointless though to keep the behavior. I mean, the whole point of keeping the behavior is so that users don't need to read the release notes and do anything when they upgrade. I think we ought to keep the existing
means
command
that
in place
monitoring
because of that.
systems need a simple update rather than a re-implementation.
Right, but why impose that update for
classic
naming?
into commands?
Like the name here is really not that important of a detail compared to asking all the users to upgrade their monitoring systems at the same time.
All right, then in that case, can we use a few minutes here to come up with a name that would be as good as perf dump, but not perf dump, that we could use here for the new command?
It could be an option to perf dump if you want to specify a different format or something like that. Or
having it an option, like we talked about, like minus all or something, right, to signify that it's both unlabeled and labeled perf counters. The problem with that is that the option parsing framework is not flexible enough for that, at least not out of the box, and it might require some tinkering to get that done. So if we and also I don't think any of the admin socket commands actually accept options that look like options. So with the minus prefix, the only thing that's accepted is just positional arguments that are just either verbs or nouns. So in the case of perf dump, like Ali mentioned, there are 2 additional optional arguments that are accepted. One is the logger subsystem. So like if you want all logs, like all perf counters produced by MDS, you would specify MDS. And the second optional argument is the name of the perf counter itself. So there is some rudimentary filtering support there. It's not clear how to easily extend that to accept a third.
Okay, alternate idea. So the current command is perf dump, right?
Right.
How about just dump counters? I actually don't think perf dump is that good a command.
Yeah, perf doesn't really communicate any meaning unless you already know what it is.
And it's overly restrictive. Some of them aren't related to performance anyway. And I'd argue against an option because, so I'd argue in favor, for one thing, of keeping the existing command because there's a lot of tooling that will need to deal with both versions of this command during an upgrade. And I think being deliberate about which version is being targeted is worthwhile. And to Ronan's point, I agree we shouldn't tie ourselves needlessly to any specific things, but if you just look at our testing framework, we access the perf counters all the time. So, I mean, we're going to cause ourselves problems in this way. So I think there are probably external users for whom it will be a problem as well. So,
okay,
yeah,
so
different
going
command
back,
that we just, provided that users can simply use the new command and never have to reference the old one again, I think a new command and letting the old command gradually degrade is a reasonable choice.
okay, that makes perfect sense to me. Just one question: how it should be named?
Dump counters. Or counters dump.
I like dump counters.
Anyone have a?
I like that.
Dump counters as a single verb with no space.
I don't have a preference on that, to be honest. Do we have any other verbed commands in that interface? Like dump counters as a verb and then a noun makes sense to me, but probably only for other stuff too.
There's the existing perf dump, and then there's the perf schema, which is the related schema for them. So I think
there's dump slow ops, there's dump historic ops, there's a bunch of dump commands already, so I think that makes sense.
Are they dump underscore
There's
thing?
the heap commands, which have a heap dump.
Like those are just single underscored words, though, right?
Yeah.
There's also the perf histograms command. I don't know if that's related.
Are we consistent about which side the dump is on? Is it always dump first or is it always dump second?
No, there's heap dump because there's heap stats and heap enable stats or whatever.
In that case, I prefer dump counters with or without an underscore.
Okay, well, I think it sounds like the direction is clear. We need a new command. We will, I guess, deliberate on the name some more in the PR. And the decision as for the old command is that we, keep it completely as is. But as the counters are converted, they will just disappear from the old command. Does that sound good to everyone?
Sounds good.
Yes,
that sounds
good.
good.
Yep.
Right.
I do have one more question. Like in theory, I don't mind. Like okay, we're not going to break it exactly, but we are going to move counters around. And in theory, I don't mind breaking interfaces on major releases, but it's kind of late. Like,
well, I think for this release,
should we push this past Reef?
I mean, the entire point of doing it this way is that this won't
only new stats.
This won't meaningfully change perf dump for this release. It'll add a new command, but it won't meaningfully change the existing one.
Yeah, perf dump will look and act exactly the same as it has before.
Over the next several releases, it will gradually degrade as it loses stuff to the labeled side. And I think that's okay.
So it's just new. The new stats are labeled, but we're not removing old ones.
Right, with the exception of 3 or 4 perf counters that were added not too long ago to the RBD Mirror Daemon. We are pretty sure there's no one is aware of them except for our monitoring team. They really want those to be converted to labels, and so I'm going to convert those to labels in Reef. But I don't think that even warrants a release note because nobody is aware of them. That's not like some well-known blue store counter.
For RGW, I've been planning to move our multi-site sync counters to labels by their source zone name instead of encoding that in the name. So that would be a visible change. I'm fine with release noting that though.
And incidentally, we should release note this anyway, because the communication to users going forward is they should use the new command and deprecate use of the old one.
Right. That was the intention. It's just that, to your point, or to Greg's statement that no perf counters should change in this release. Unfortunately, some will.
And if you're comfortable with your multi-site ones and cases comfortable, or the mirror ones and cases comfortable moving the multi-site ones, that seems fine. I just wanted to make sure we weren't going to lose other stuff.
Yeah, we won't. I mean, that's why we're having this discussion, because it's
yeah.
Yep.
DC mentioned another variation of a name, counter dump, counter schema, and counter labels in the chat.
Yeah, that was just related to the way that we have a perf dump and a perf schema right now, and the labeled counters would want the same schema command. So something consistent with counter dump could make sense there.
Well, I would make it counters with an S at the end, though, because
sure.
Yeah. Other than that sounds good. But just to make it clear that counter or counters labels, like the last one, would dump just labels, or like I'm not sure like what's the purpose, because we've agreed that dump should dump everything, both unlabeled and labeled.
So perf dump has some filtering built in for counter instance and counter names. And so I would like the label aware command to also be able to filter by labels. And so counter labels would dump what labels we know about that you could use to filter the counter dump.
Okay, so it's the same thing that you've suggested in the PR earlier. Okay,
exactly
that
right.
Makes sense to me. Just like I said, if it was me, I'd just add an S at the end there. But this looks great.
I wrote our conclusion to that on the CDM tracker, so we have record of it. Was there anything else that we wanted to wrap up? 'Cause it sounds like we hit a conclusion, but if anybody else has anything to say, go for it.
Just thanks to Ali for sticking with this one.
Yeah, I think that sounds good to me. All right, that was our last topic on the agenda, so I think that's the end. Good job, everybody. And next month is the APAC friendly meeting, and then subsequent month is going to be EMEA again. See you all then. And have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
See you.
Bye all.
Thanks, everybody.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.
Right.